Good times.
Did you get it to flip around?
I just restarted it.
That's the weirdest thing.
You should have seen me trying to mouse.
All right, fantastic. Thank you.
Okay.
Everything is.
Okay, we did not have to create a new meeting link, so YouTube is working, so we're going to go ahead and call this meeting to order. And this is a joint council meeting, URA, and a joint session with the Parks Commission. And I have city councilors Carmen Matthews, Sarah Stevens, and Council President Lucinda DeNovo and Mayor Benetti are online. And then I believe we have a few Parks Commissioners online. Oh, here's the screen right here. And some that will be arriving in just a few minutes. So our first item on the agenda is public comments. So I'm just going to go in order of the roster here. And Dan Heinrichs is our first person, has a subject of a bike lane on Central.
Right, so.
If you could state your name.
Sure.
And the city you reside in.
I'm Dan Henricks. I live in Coos Bay, and I'm here about the bike lane that's proposed to go from 101 up to Mingus Park. And I just had I have a question and a couple of comments. The first question I have is quite a bit of on-street parking is being deleted so that the bike lane can go in. And I didn't have time to look it up, but I'm concerned about how that might affect future development in that particular area, because I own a parking lot in a building. I own a parking lot at 5th and Commercial, and then the building just to the west of that. And I'm thinking about doing something with that vacant parking lot. So I want to make sure that any zoning issues regarding on-street parking don't affect my ability to develop that lot if the parking's taken away by the bike lane. So that's my only concern, real concern as far as I'm concerned. And like I said, I haven't had a chance to look that up. I don't know if it's a real issue or not, but that's my concern. The other is I sit in that office all day, every day, and almost every day somebody's going the wrong way down that road. So if you do this project, you really need to put up good, one-way signage, that kind of thing. And then as I was walking down here, I just looked at the intersection of 7th and Commercial. That's going to be a real problem, I think, as far as safety goes, because the way it bumps out. This is just past the Dairy Queen. So just take that into account and keep an eye on that. That's all I had.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
And Harv Shabote from the Coos Bay Downtown Association.
I have 3 minutes.
Yes, I'm sorry, I should have announced that also.
You know I can be long-winded. Okay, very good. I'll go very, very quickly. Harv Shabote, Coos Bay Downtown Association, and I'll leave the statement with you, and you can read it at your leisure. The Coos Bay Downtown Association has been doing a survey on the proposed route, interacting with the different businesses here in town, and kind of have a mixed result to report to you. For those businesses that have parking right on the route, they have raised some concerns about losing that parking space. On the other hand, if they're not on the route and they don't have on-street parking, if you look to businesses in general, they are receptive to the project, basically saying that for all practical purposes, they hope that that brings more people and more foot traffic to the downtown. Our board did look at that. Their one concern, again, is that, yes, they want to encourage a variety of transportation modes to bring more retail to the area, but they are especially concerned if there's going to be a negative impact on that on-street parking. And there's a number of businesses where that's really obvious in this town. You go to the South Coast office, for example, where does their loading bay? People who want to move furniture, for example, or buy furniture, getting that to a parking place that's not next to that building is an issue. I do want to raise, interestingly, I was following through with a suggestion in our board president that I contact the state agency in terms of how much the loss of a parking space might be to a business. Interestingly enough, the state did come back and actually provided me a study, which again I will share with you. But the bottom line basically is that in the studies that have been done, when it comes to bicycle lanes and parking, it has not affected or impacted the end result or the bottom line of the businesses, which is, again, in this study, and there's a variety of studies that back that up. Anyway, wanted to basically share our board's concern with regard to the parking and get that on the record that there are businesses that don't want to lose that parking in front of their establishment.
All right, thank you. And I should have stated at the beginning that each speaker that wants to submit public comments will have 3 minutes. Our timer is our city attorney, Nate McClintock. He will give you a 1-minute warning when you have 1 minute left, and then you'll hear that little alarm when your time is up. You can speak on anything, but of course, most of the folks that have signed up want to discuss the bikes and the agenda items, the bike projects that are on the agenda. So our next person would be Dean Lundy. And if you could state your name and the city that you reside in for the record.
Dean Lundy, Coos Bay, Oregon. I wanted to take this opportunity to commend the board for number one, moving forward with the pedestrian bike lane up there. I think it's really well thought out. A lot of work went into it, and a lot of the community members that I've talked to really appreciate what you've done. Also, I wanted to mention I was so pleased, and I'm glad that our mayor is listening. I was so pleased that there was something concerning the Devereaux Center. I talked to a former city council member, no names, but it sounded like Drew Farmer, and he said that they can actually legally, without any cost, check for criminal background and domestic violence history on anybody showing up there to that service. And I live and work in the Empire District, and I deal with a lot of criminals and a lot of people with weapons and trash issues too. So if we could, they're going to try and whimper to keep the permits going for the Devereaux Center, but if they could eliminate the known criminals and the known domestic violence people, that would eliminate 90% of the problems that we're dealing with, speaking just for myself. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And the last person on the list that I have is Eric. Is it Clough? Okay, sorry about that.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I live at 723 7th Terrace. And I was recently a Parks Commission member, which I am no longer, and I just want to first express gratitude for the opportunity to be on the Parks Commission. It was a good experience for me, and I'm wanted to reiterate that myself and Front Street Community Bike Works remain an advocate for cycling, and that we're available for meetings like work sessions like this, or any time you folks, leadership, might want some input from citizens groups that we represent, the cycling community. Happy to provide any kind of background for that at any time. And as far as some of the specific agenda items, the Front Street to Mingus route is on the agenda, so I mean, I'd be happy to comment or answer any questions about that agenda topic at that time, and help try to clarify maybe some misinformation or unknowns that are out there. So.
I believe if you have anything that you'd like to add to those topics, you would need to do it now during public comment. We sort of had a reformat.
Okay.
Is there anything that you wanted to address at this time?
Well, I guess what I would like to do in my time here is just say that the route has been pretty well defined, and the city had hired the consultant to do the initial proposal of the route with alternatives. When we first came up with this route, we were proposing a one-way route. It was simple. It was supposed to be very simple, just paint on the road, no complicated costs or expenses or anything like that. But of course, once we evolved the return route, which was desired by the council and others, and us, including myself, it'd be nice to have a return route. That really complicated the route planning. And so now what we've got, the proposed alternative that, the preferred alternative included a return route with 3 blocks of a dual direction, 2-directional buffered bike line on Commercial between 7th and 4th. And that is where the parking is going to be lost. I know that's an eternal concern for everybody in the world, but parking, all those businesses that currently exist have off-street parking. So there will be some loss of parking along that 3-block stretch. That's all. Nowhere else in town is there any parking being lost, being proposed. So there is a lot more information that I feel like councilors, leadership, and the public need to know about this proposal. I think people are vastly misinformed before registering concerns and complaints, and that's what I would like to offer as a facilitator to try to help present answers to those kind of questions. So that's it. Thank you.
And again, this is a work session, so no decisions will come from this meeting. This is an informational meeting and an opportunity for us to have this discussion with the Parks Commission, and then there will be other opportunities as well. So watch that agenda.
Okay. Thank you.
All right, that is everyone I have on the roster.
Hey, Stephanie, can you use your microphone, please?
Pardon me? Oh, I'm so sorry about that. I was just explaining that this is a work session and no decisions will come out of this meeting, that this is an opportunity for us to have a discussion with the Parks Commission, and there will be other opportunities for public comment. And then that was the last person that we had on the roster. Is there anyone else that would like to make any public comments? And we didn't have any written public comments. All right. Then that is public comment period, and now we will go to item 2, which is to review the council and URA board action items. And the discussion is regarding the Parks Commission. Goals.
And I would like to ask if possible, we could consider maybe moving item C up first.
Oh, that's right, you did talk to me about that. Does anyone have any problem with moving item C, which is the discussion of creating a Parks Commission fact-finding committee for bicycle and pedestrian facilities, moving that to the front of the meeting, and then moving the other 2 items down?
I do not.
Okay, hearing nothing else, then we will go to that item. So, did you want to give some background on that?
I certainly can, or if Greg would like to as well, but just to kind of open this up, since November of '23, the Parks Commission has assumed the responsibility of providing input on projects that include bicycle and pedestrian facilities. The Parks Commission is performing this new duty, but it's proven to be a little bit more time-consuming than originally anticipated. At the June 20th, 2024 Parks Commission meeting, the topic of bicycle and pedestrian subcommittee, or a citizen advisory committee, was brought up and discussed by the members of the Parks Commission. Staff informed the commission that the creation of such a committee may trigger public meeting laws. The Parks Commission felt that they could inform the public at a regularly scheduled Parks Commission meeting, which would give the public opportunity to comment. As such, the commissioners requested staff investigate the feasibility of creating an advisory committee for bicycle and pedestrian facilities that would not be subject to public meeting laws. City staff then coordinated with the city attorney regarding this request. The city attorney, Nate, advised that a fact-finding committee could be a viable option for the commission. The fact-finding committee would meet to discuss bicycle and pedestrian facilities, not be subject to public meeting laws, and present their findings, not recommendations, to the Parks Commission at a regularly scheduled meeting. Staff informed the Parks Commission of this option at the July 11th Parks Commission work session, and as a result, the Parks Commission is recommending a fact-finding committee be formed that is comprised of a total of 10 members, 2 commission members, and 8 community members from throughout the city. In accordance with council rules, section 3, it states public members can be appointed to a committee. However, the creation of committee and the appointment of individuals to the committee is a function of the council. The process to appoint members of a committee is outlined in section 3.1.5 of the rules as follows: nomination and confirmation, which speaks to the process by which positions for boards, commissions, committees may be made. Nominations may be made by the mayor or any 2 councilors and shall be subject to confirmation by the council. There's a little bit more detail there in regards to that process. If the council wishes to approve the Parks Commission recommendation of forming a fact-finding committee, the Parks Commission will recommend the 2 commission members and create an application process for community members and present their member recommendations to council for approval at a later date. So it's a little bit of background.
Okay, so I will open it up for discussion. I have a couple of concerns of my own, but is this something that we're opening to the entire, the Parks Commission as well as the?
I mean, my understanding of the intent of this meeting is to have an open dialogue between both bodies, so that you might listen and learn from each other to arrive at a conclusion.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, because my question is, can you shed a little more light on what the idea was behind this proposal?
Yes, we have a strong, we've already had, even before we were given this task as the commission, been discussing bike lanes. I remember when I was on the TSP effort almost a decade ago. So it's been in the community, and now that we have it, it makes sense that we engage the community in a process, and we didn't want to encumber it with more staff time having to deal with public meeting laws. So our astute attorney informed us well on how to do that, and that's what we came up with.
Okay, thank you. Can you maybe talk a little bit, Nate, about that?
I mean, basically, if you're going to have a group of people, a subcommittee, and if they're going to make recommendations or advice to the Parks Commission, then that's a public meeting, needs all the minutes, needs to be open to the public, press available, that type of thing, a much more formal affair. And part of that concern was staff time that would be taken up in doing all of that. So it is my understanding of the parks that what they're looking for is not really for advice, but more information. So you can form a subcommittee made up of how many ever people that they desire, that the council approves, that can meet, do investigations, and bring that information to the commission. And then the commission can analyze it in their own right and make advice and suggestions, recommendations to the council. And in that kind of context, there's not going to be as much staff time involved with the subcommittee. But the key is the subcommittee is not there to give advice. It is not there to make recommendations. It's simply to, learn information and convey that information in an intelligent fashion to the commission so that they can make those decisions, make those recommendations.
So I have a comment, if I can, along those lines, just to reinforce some of the things that Jamie said. The whole pedestrian and bicycle aspect was not part of what the Parks Commission had been doing. And when issues came up, because it's in the ordinance, we got it. And I think some of the difficulty we've run into are two things. One is expertise. We don't have a lot of expertise on the Parks Commission right now handling pedestrian and bicycle things. There's a lot of engineering questions, traffic flow, all sorts of things. And I think a fact-finding group could be very helpful in looking at that, as well as getting input from the public. I think the intent of the Parks Commission was to involve people throughout the city, Empire, Coos Bay, businesses, to try to get their input on information regarding bike and pedestrian paths. The other issue is that because we've been dealing with it, it takes up so much of the Parks Commission's time that I think we neglect a little bit the parks. We never had a work session before. Now we've added a work session every month to try to take up some of that slack so that we can deal with bicycle issues as well as regular park issues. But if you were to look back against any of our meetings, you would find that we take a considerable amount of time talking about bike things and not as much time talking about parks as we used to. And I know it's a difficult decision, and I know when this came up before, there was even a suggestion of making a separate transportation committee for the city that would include handling the pedestrian and bike issues. I kind of view this suggestion, the fact-finding group, as middle ground. It's not the Parks Commission does it all by themselves, and it's not a separate standing committee that the city has on transportation. Maybe it's a sweet spot in between, and I think it's something that we ought to try. I don't think, since it's quote-unquote not a public meeting, I don't think staff even needs to be there. I don't think Greg or Jennifer need to be there for those meetings. I think we bring the information that we find to the Parks Commission's meetings and the work sessions that the Park Commission has, and they get their input then. So anyways, that's my sense of the situation.
Go ahead, Coco.
Yeah, Coco Sutton, Parks Commission. One of the things that has happened with anything under the realm of parks is funding. That's always been an issue in Coos Bay for 80, 90 years. When you add anything with transportation, there's also an issue on managing the costs once you build something. So one of the challenges is trying to find a way where we get engagement from a variety of people that use or are involved with the assets, have them sift through funding as well as planning, and then getting that back to a commission or an entity to make a decision. We seem to spend an inordinate amount of time on getting planning or ideas, and we never get the opportunity to execute it. So we have been trying to look at other avenues, such as adopt a park and engaging other people, and this would be a good example. But I also think that when you come to anything with transportation, regardless of if it's bicycle, pedestrian, multimodal, the chance for accountability and lawsuits is greatly increased beyond anything parks has. And that's strictly the fact that whenever you change anything in a traffic situation, the way that you put it in place and present it and maintain it has to have a lot more attention to that than keeping a restroom or a swing set or something accessible to the public. So that's a concern, and I think that's why we've discussed, as has the community, a lot of concerns that come up when we're dealing with any changes to bicycle or pedestrian or traffic, that it warrants a little more care, and then the question of funding. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Do you have anything to add, Troy?
No, I mean, it makes perfect practical sense to me. It's just a way of reassigning tasks. No decisions are made from this group, no recommendations are made from you. It's simply fact-finding so that you could go to your commission meetings and then proceed further in a public setting. So, for me, though, give me the relationship between the Parks Commission and the City Council.
So the Parks Commission, like the tree board, those bodies are intended to provide information to the city council to make decisions. So they're not.
So they make recommendations
Yeah.
that we then act on.
And it's so that all of that doesn't happen here. We've pieced out those,
So to me, that's
elements
just
that are-
another subset of what that is. You get the information, you put it together, you make recommendations to us, and then we act on it. I think it makes sense, so.
It makes much more sense now because transparency is a very important thing for me, and I'm sure for the city and other people that are representatives of the city. So I always am concerned about transparency and not having a public meeting when these are things, but it does make sense. Is there anyone online that has anything that they needed to ask or would like to discuss?
I'd just like to, this is Councilor Matthews, I'd just like to voice my support of this as well. It really is just going to help our meeting move a lot more efficiently to the point of actually getting some work done outside of bikes and also getting more work done on the issue of bike transportation. It is a lot to digest, it's a lot to discuss, and a lot of questions are being asked. And if we had a small group just coming and giving us the lay of the land, that would be very, very helpful for us to be able to make recommendations to the city council.
Yeah, the city attorney can enter into this. Although this fact-finding group would not be subject to public meeting laws, I don't think that fact-finding group would be adverse from having their meetings open to the public and/or taking comments from people from the public. So you're concerned about transparency. I would imagine that would be something we would be able to do. So.
Okay. Anyone else online?
Yeah, I agree. This is Joe. Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, Coco brought up a good point that when we are dealing with transportation, whether it's bikes or other, we need to be conscious of the costs and the maintenance of it. And I think that's always lacking, and it's important. When we go back to the suggested bike route that we're talking on the other agenda item, there's some costs that are going to have to be thought about, and I think that's pertinent that we need to do that. And then the time that it's taking away from the parks, as it's been suggested, and not allowing the Parks Commission to deal with the parks issues and letting this entity separate find some information and factual. So if I understand, this would be recommended go to the Parks Commission and then to the City Council. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, so no, I definitely support this. I think it's a good step.
All right, anyone else? Just go ahead and chime in.
Okay, this is Coco Sutton, and I just wanted to reiterate that this wasn't a mechanism by which the Parks Commission was not going to make decisions or be taking on this tasks. It was to involve users, stakeholders, and shareholders that can find information from various entities, put together comprehensive information so that when we get into the middle of a discussion, there's not more questions coming up that don't have an answer, and then we're starting over again. So thank you.
For instance, it was brought up tonight at least twice, the problems with taking away parking. And we can have the fact-finding committee drill down on that more intensely and personally with the people involved and find out what is actually the problem and maybe come to a mutually agreeable solution if there is one. So that would be the fact-finding that would come back to us and say, oh, we didn't know this. This is good information, by the way. Thank you very much. Did you provide this? Yeah.
Did you, I just want to get this correct, you actually suggested that people who work together come to a decision? That's crazy talk.
All right, well, it sounds like you have consensus to move forward with this, and then everyone seems comfortable.
Yeah, that's what I'm hearing, and so we can start, we know what that process looks as far as advertising and appointments and all those kinds of things, so we can definitely start that process.
All right. Anything else on this item?
I do, sorry. I
go ahead.
Just a wonky thing. That I think that you're going to find plenty of people that are going to be interested in participating in this. And my guess is they're all going to be super pro for moving this forward. It might not hurt to have somebody, maybe not totally against it, but somebody who might be on the more concerned side that would help, look up the opposite side of something, to sort of be the devil's advocate sort of thing. Just my 2 cents.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. And then, so we will go back to the original agenda item 2A, the discussion of the Parks Commission's goals. Greg, are you going to take that?
I will.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I was trying to find it here.
So it's page 5 is top. We have a PowerPoint presentation up there as well for the folks online to take a look at it. So at the July 18th, 2024 Parks Commission meeting, the commission recommended the following goals be brought to council for discussion during the September 2020 to today's joint council work session meeting. So there's 9 two-year goals that have been recommended by the commission. The rehabilitation replacement of the Mingus Park restrooms, the Safe Routes to School plan, the Front Street bicycle and pedestrian improvements, which is now also known as the Front Street Bicycle Improvement Facilities Project. The downtown Sherrills project. The Front Street Bicycle and Pedestrian Plan is part of the Front Street Blueprint. Sorry about that. The safety and stabilization of the Mingus Park Community Building, also known as a Boy Scout cabin, or previously known as a Boy Scout cabin. The dredging of Mingus Park Pond, alternate sources of funding, citywide comprehensive bike and pedestrian plan, and the continued support of the Marshfield Pioneer Cemetery. So those are the two-year goals as established by the commission and recommended to move forward by them. And so the Parks Commission has had some pretty good conversations on some of these topics already. And with that, I'll turn it over for discussion.
Okay, then I will open it up for discussion. Did anyone want to start? All right, Coco.
In the last 2 years, the Parks Commission has had a fact-finding group that started an Adopt a Park pilot program. Things that are not bicycle and transportation related on this. So I'm speaking of specifically rehabilitation and replacement of restrooms in Mingus Park, and the community building at Mingus Park, which is the oldest structure remaining in Mingus Park from the WPA, and the Marshfield Pioneer Cemetery. All of those things, one common feature of those is the need for funding outside of what the city has. In the last 10 years, grant funding for park and recreation in Oregon is generally all funded through state parks, through State Historic Preservation Office, and pass-throughs from the federal government come through there. There are also private organizations that in the past had funded parks and recreation. Since COVID-19, many of those have retooled, and they're focusing more on social and well-being issues as opposed to specifically assets. And we're finding that more and more of those are asking for not only the grantors to put some skin in the game, not just funding, but community funding. So through the Adopt a Park program the last 2 years, we've had different projects and we've gotten different feedback. And the bottom line that we found was, if we're setting a goal, we not only need to look at the first costs, we need to look at the life cycle costs, because that's going to be asked of us. And having a comprehensive plan where the city staff, who have been awesome in assisting with all of this, the city council, whom we provide information for, as well as the public, not only users in our town, but tourists and other people that use, have some kind of mechanism by which they can participate. We do have a budget of capital improvement that I believe, you can tell me if I'm wrong, Greg, is $440,000 each year.
That's a ballpark number, yes.
Yes. And one of the concerns is when you start going for grants, because of the cost of inflation and other setbacks that can happen, we want to make sure that we have mechanisms for not only encumbering funds, because most of these grants, by the time you apply for them, receive them, implement them, and then complete them, you could be looking at a 5-year cycle. So our hope is, by focusing on these and having good communication between the people that are ultimately responsible to the public, meaning the city council and the city staff, that our organization as the commission can help with facilitating all of this and finding better ways to get the involvement, the numbers, and the data that we need so that we can get that funding. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Thank you. I was just going to give you a little background on this. The Parks Commission actually met twice in work session, going over these goals for the Parks Commission. We thought it was important to kind of focus our efforts in certain areas. So with the help of staff and the Parks Commission, we tried to prioritize those things that we thought were important. And also some of them have already received some funding. So the Mingus Park Community Building has actually received a couple of grants, one from the Ford Foundation, one's from the Kokio Community Grant. And the Mingus Park Restrooms has actually gotten a grant funded from Morgan and also the Pacific Power. So those are up there because we already got money, because we want to continue to work on them and use that money. And the other things, we looked at and decided that those were priorities for the parks right now. One interesting thing, if you notice on that list, there's Safe Routes to Schools, by the way, is planning, and that grant has already been approved to cover the cost of the planning for Safe Routes to Schools for Sunset, Marshfield, and the Discovery Academy. But anyways, my point was Safe Routes to Schools, okay. Front Street bicycle and pedestrian improvements. There's actually more in there than just that, but there's a lot of bike and pedestrian stuff, okay? And then a citywide comprehensive bike and pedestrian plan. You can see there's 3 things already on our goals, and another really good reason to see why we need another group to help us gather information and work on some of that stuff. So, and so we thought all those things were important up there. The Marshfield Cemetery was on there too, because by being a priority of the Parks Commission in the city, it's easier for them to write for grants. So I think there's logical reasons for all those things. Finding the money for some of them, as Coco said, may be a little bit difficult, but the grant writer has helped an awful lot, and city staff has helped an awful lot, and I'm hopeful we get there on them.
And as Coco pointed out to me earlier, 4 of those goals are having to do with pedestrians and bicycles, just FYI.
I had another comment on an item that's on here. I don't know if Bev is here, so I wanted to speak on her behalf on the Mingus Park Pond. We've known for many years that the design throughout the ages in Mingus Park all were around watershed issues. And this park has a really interesting history with that. But with the creation of Choshi Gardens and then the changing over the years of the bottom half of the pond, we know that a lot of the dredging and care that should have been done on scheduled maintenance that was intended when those things were first put in was never done. And I know a lot of people always talk about kicking the can down the road until it becomes a big problem. So we would like to also partnership and focus, and it's going to take, again, a lot of expertise because you're dealing with water, you're dealing with DEQ, environmental issues, and our watershed that eventually gets in the bay. This dredging of Mingus Park Pond is going to take money beyond what the city has, but we know it has to be done. And it's unfortunately, because you're dealing with a moving thing such as water, has to be timed appropriately, and it can't be done in stages. So that's something that we have had a concern and feedback for the Parks Commission for probably, I think, 10 to 15 years. I believe the catchment that we just talked about when we just did a test of some water bars on a area from the Mingus Park cabin, which is one of the original parts of the park. The trails and things on those higher points wash down into the bottom of Mingus Park. And we have aerators that go out. We have issues with vector control, et cetera. So this is going to be a huge project, but working together and planning on that so that we can make a good effort to have things in place before we put in for a grant so that we don't end up getting a grant and then having to work from behind is a concern. So thank you.
More than one person to us, public person, has mentioned the dredging of the pond down there. It's a serious issue. That park gets used a lot. A lot of people walk around it. They appreciate it. They don't like the weeds. They don't like the aerators not being on. And when you look at how much it's going to cost to dredge it, Greg may be able to speak to this because they did some background stuff. It's not a matter of getting a backhoe out there and digging stuff up, unfortunately. Greg, maybe you can let them know.
Yeah, well, that was going to be my question is that number freaks me out a little bit. I mean, I think that's a great asset there, and deferred maintenance is a frustrating issue. But, I mean, $2 million to dig out a pond?
That was the estimate that we received. It just kind of talking with Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife and Department of State Lands about a year and a half ago was a dollar number that we received then. We've had conversations with ODFW again. We're hopeful that there's going to be some grant opportunities coming up. But those are the dollar numbers that we have. The methodology in which they wanted to do some dredging, the old traditional shovel dredging, is not preferred by Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, and so they want to do some different style of dredging. But there's also a cost that goes along with it, and there's a lot of material that needs to come out of that pond.
It's the disposal of the material that's the most cost prohibitive piece.
Yeah, I mean, I hear that, and I get that, and I realize there's environmental issues, and there's fish issues, and sensitivity to the rest of the park, but I mean, are they going to wear gold-plated boots when they're doing this? Or I just those numbers, just as a private businessman, those numbers just blow me away of how they can justify that. I'm not yelling at anybody, and I want these things done, and it makes it almost impossible for us to do those when those costs are those that are that astronomical.
1.8 to 2.3 million.
Coco Sutton, one of the things I wanted to mention is if we were looking at today, your two largest parks, so you have John Toppett's Park, that's 120 acres, although a lot of that is water, and Mingus Park is actually 55 acres. If you were to choose a site for recreating right now and taking into concern all the things that you would for building a park from the bottom up, those sites would probably be your last choice, or you would have eliminated parts of them. Originally, that part of Mingus Park that sits up on 14th that comes into West Park Roadway and where the Parkham and Barham Terrace, that area there, that land was acquired by the city during the Depression in 30 and 31 because the county had back taxes about $10,200. In today's value, it would be millions. And the laws that are in place now for tax protection when you foreclose were not there. So that was inherited clear over to the schools that are over there, Milner Crest, and then the city sold parts of those off. But you'll notice there's a big natural ravine and dip in there where 3 different creeks run off. Originally, when the first park in 1925, Perham Park, was donated to the city, that was all dammed up and there was actually a reservoir in there. So the amount of water that comes through that watershed is larger than you think. So when you look at acreages, and one of the things that was brought up as we were looking at the old maps as we're trying to get a National Historic designation on that Mingus Park cabin so that we can be open to grant money, because when you have a structure that's over a certain year, you cannot get funding from other sources because it's historic in nature. Having said that, when doing the research, what we found was all of that water was dammed up under 3 or 4 different iterations of that park, and most of them were taken out. And so what we're seeing now is letting it plateau and spread out a little bit more. And when you start having those kinds of interventions, it is very costly. Originally, that was a lake. So you'll see old maps and you'll say, well, that's not a lake, it's a pond. There was an actual lake. So if you went up to what is the cabin and you went to the back, all the trees were gone. You would see a lake. If you stand at the bottom of the Red Bridge and look up that big hill, you can see where it was dammed, and that's where the water was. So all the descriptions of a lake were correct, and the lake was removed and reworked between 1938 and 1943, I believe. And so that's what we ended up with over the years. And controlling it is, you know, depending on the water that you have in drought cycles, can be immense because of what washes down. So.
And it also hasn't been done for a considerable period of time. So now we're at the point of where it's at the extreme end of cost and use, and versus, you know, doing it prior. Gone are the days of us mucking it out on our own in a volunteer, like, because it's considered essentially biohazard because of the feces.
Yeah, I think it's a good goal. I just, whenever I see those numbers associated with public works, it takes me a minute to wrap my head around it.
Well, I'm sorry, Jamie.
I can think of one analogy, and that's what's happening in the bay right now with dredging. It's extremely costly. I don't know what each shovel represents, how many thousands of dollars per shovel, but that's obviously in a different system. They're allowed to use clamshells, whereas ODFW, DEQ, well, they deal with them as well, the Army Corps of Engineers, but we're dealing with water downstream from the Mingus Pond, which is, as was mentioned, it is expensive, unfortunately. And it's a Coos Bay problem because Marshfield has been filled. That used to be tidal, and now it's getting, as Coco says, runoff from a large forest.
Counselor Matthews?
Yeah, I just wanted to chime in. I know that number seems absurdly high, and I feel that way too as a private citizen. However, this is not a private citizen project. It's a much larger community-based thing, public job. So you really have to like put on a different hat when you look at these numbers. Honestly, I mean, it's just the way that has to be. One of the things that I was thinking about with the dredging of this is maybe instead of paying to have it done for the first time in however many decades, is to investigate if buying the equipment would be a better route so that we would have it on hand to continue the maintenance on our own. Maybe that would help us save some, but as Commissioner Lyons mentioned, that a lot of the cost is the disposal of the spoils. So I'm not sure if that would save us much money if we were able to do it in-house with the proper equipment. It's basically a suction filtration system that is much different and less invasive than just going in there with a backhoe. That's one thing. But I do have comments on the rest of the goals as well. I'm not sure if I should move on to that or if I should continue on with if we should continue on with the Mingus Park dredge.
Does anyone else have any comments on this dredging, this in particular?
Yeah, I do, Stephanie. I understand everyone's concern about this and the expense, and it's been mentioned by Coco, Carmen, and everyone else on the committee. To get there, we still have to have the money. I mean, this is a great project. I believe, and staff, you can correct me if I'm wrong about this, pre-pandemic, we had a $1.5 million grant that went away during the pandemic to do this dredging and do some work at the park. The bottom line is, I don't know where we're gonna get these dollars. I think it's a great project. I'd love to find a way to get there, but without the dollars or some creative way, maybe as Carmen mentioned, I don't know how we get there. And it's discouraging because this really needs some attention. I don't want to be a downer here, but we need to find the funding. And then, as Coco mentioned, we have to have some things in place before we even go out and try to get the grants. So I guess if we're going to do anything, maybe we do some pre-work and get some things squared away so we can go after the grants if they're available. And I'm not sure they are. Jamie, they meant, in the Bay, they're getting federal dollars. I would love to have federal dollars to help us with some of this stuff. We don't have access to that, even though as hard as we tried. So anyway, those are my 2 cents. Unfortunately, it was different.
My question would be, if we keep kicking the can down on the road on this particular item and it wasn't a priority, do we risk losing that pond? And because, eventually, I think we're kind of cresting the hill where you're seeing it rapidly.
So I would
decay.
explore the option of how much staff time is spent on just keeping the aerators going because there's so much muck, dealing with the parrot's feather because it's too warm because there's so much muck. So there's some other expenses in there that we're spending just to try to keep it going as long as we can before it turns into a giant mucky field, because that's where we're headed.
I have a comment on the funding. This was looked into, the grants that I mentioned. So for this particular project, there's a pass-through money called Land Water Conservation Fund. The challenge for the city is you have a lot of pre-work that you have to have ready, not only in planning, but dealing with where you're going to put your spoils, what type of planning you're going to do for maintaining, or if you have to change for turbidity, et cetera. And a lot of these projects are already done, so when you look back at the past recipients, most of them are several $1 million, $4 to 5 to 6. So if you look in Roseburg or Grants Pass or other areas around the state, you can compare that they're dealing with similar situations. The challenge for this city is having a mechanism to get the work outlined so that when that grant opportunity becomes available, and it's only every 2 years, and then it takes another year to get approval, you'll have everything what's called shovel ready. I will say in defense of that, unfortunately, there can be changes to federal and state laws when you're dealing with them. So having those small groups of people who have worked like Fish and Wildlife, Division of State Lands, Department of Environmental Quality, those kind of people can help get those plans ready. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at is things that have been prepared in the past when it was a smaller project. Now it's at the state where they may look and say, what are you going to do for turbidity and runoff and things like that. So there are those land water conservation grants and coupling them sometimes with trail issues because your trails and the topography of the area, just like with your sewer plant and your runoff, are always going to be an issue. So sometimes you have to do re-engineering, and that's why looking when those grants come available and having things shovel ready. Thank you.
Yeah.
So, Coco, this is Joe. I have a question. So I just don't know if staff has the capacity, but do these agencies have grants available for this pre-work and to get this work outlined? Like DLCD, we got a grant to do a site development for housing. Is that something similar available in these other agencies? Because if that's the case, we could move forward in that area.
Even Fish and Wildlife
Yeah, the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, the Division of State Lands, maybe not so much. Department of Environmental Quality, you have to catch them within their budget cycles because, different things change. I mean, we had a recession starting in 2014, then we had the COVID pandemic, and a lot of those entities are involved in other testing and stuff that took away from their original goals. But looking through the grants, we did a comprehensive study of the grants that are available, and there was a list that was provided to the city, which we keep expanding on with our grant writer, and it identified those particular funding mechanisms for park and recreation that are in watershed areas, and looking at the type of funding that's put in. But again, they do want the city to have either in-kind or matching funds. But when you're doing your pre-work, if you involve all those other agencies as partners, they can come look, and then we have our local watershed group that also is very familiar with land water conservation funds as well. So usually those grants, I think, are a 40, 60, or 30, and it's based on the number of people that live in your area. So we have a list of that we've identified for some of these ongoing projects. But the start is that even when that grant became available, we just weren't ready with the documentation and the information we needed, and the staff only has a certain amount of time to get that together.
And
Well, I would suggest that if we, on this, we try to get this pre-work done. From what I can gather from what Coco's stated, that's the criteria that we need to do first before we move any further, and see if we can accomplish that in whatever fashion.
Yeah, I would concur with the mayor. I mean, I don't know where we're going with the whole conversation tonight on the goals, other than that it's a good list. It looks like we're moving forward with most of it. And we were discussing this, and to me, that's what the next step would be, is to see if we could find grant money for the pre-work to get it shovel ready, so that we could then look for grant money to actually complete the project.
I am under the understanding that there might not even be a preferred method that's current. And somebody in staff, please correct me if I'm wrong.
The last conversation I had with ODFW, which would be one of the bigger grantors there, they, like I was alluding to earlier, they want to stay away from the shovel style of dredging, because it increases the turbidity level so great into the water that it is detrimental to the fish. So they want to do suction dredging, but they have a test. My understanding is that they have a test pilot program, but when I talked with them last, they still hadn't implemented that pilot program as of yet. And so that's my understanding, is what they told me. So Jamie's absolutely correct. As far as I know, there's not a approved methodology in ODFW for dredging at this point.
We'd love to be their test.
I was just going to say that.
Right, would we be their pilot project?
I know that they identified a project in the eastern half of the state to do that, John Day Park.
Well, this would
And
present
they
a different
wanted
set
to
of
do that there.
circumstances where we get a lot of water. And we, what'd you say, 3 creeks that were running into that?
The John Day is one of the only non-impeded rivers until it goes to the Columbia that has all of the threatened and endangered species. So there's, because of Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife's goals, that would make sense.
Sure, but maybe they want a second, smaller
Yeah.
one.
They're just one of the partners, though. The Land Water Conservation Fund is the big funder for these types of things, and they would certainly take into consideration when you present your plan. It's similar to the restrooms, where you're having plans that are upwards of $1 million. It goes through various phases of review, and they would want to see the partners, and that means anyone in the state that has to sign off on things. So Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, Division of State Lands, Department of Environmental Quality, and the Land Water Conservation Board would be those entities. And even if you talked to them 2 years ago, things can change. So getting all of those things in place at one time is best practice, so that when that grant cycle comes up again, you're ready to put it in, and you've had a chance to look at the other projects, and there's several of them that are very similar that you can look at to get information. But it's the time factor and the expertise to get it.
One of the also advantages for a section for our location is because the wall perimeter for our pond is quite old. And so by doing the physical dredging part, that could possibly continue to degrade the edge of our pond versus the section, which is a little bit more user-friendly to our perimeter.
Okay. Anything else on this agenda item? I think it's a great set of goals. Wish we could do it all.
Could I chime in? Could I chime in on another point, or another one of those specific goals?
Oh, yes, I'm sorry, I forgot you did have some other things you wanted to bring up.
Yeah, for me, one of the things that I'm constantly thinking about, and of course it came up tonight, is funding. And our capital improvement, pile of cash is very small for the parks system. And for me, being on the Parks Commission and living in downtown, parks are extremely important. And I think they are overall for a large part of our community. And I am struggling with the fact that we are so underfunded in our parks, to the point where I believe we're setting up a lot of our staff for just failure. You can't complete the work that you want to do because we don't have the funding to do so. And our park staff does an amazing job with the resources that we have given them. I mean, our parks are still very approachable. Do they need improvement? Absolutely. That's what we want to do. So finding alternative sources of funding, finding new places where we can pull dollars to bring it into the parks budget is something that I'm pretty passionate about. That being said, we've had discussions on which way that could go, and I think, honestly, we know that the Parks Commission isn't making any decisions. We are the recommending body that leads to the City Council. But thinking about what kind of avenues the City Council would be interested in us investigating about alternative sources of funding would be helpful, at least from my point of view. What is an acceptable line to investigate? Is this something like some cities in Oregon do a prepared food and beverage tax. The city of Ashland does that. They have wonderful parks and they have a pretty substantial budget for their parks. I'm not sure how popular that would be in this community, but it would be one way to have tourism help to pay the bill for some of our parks and at least pull some of that money in, but it would also affect our local population. I know there's other cities that have a building permit fee, and that is, of course, I would imagine being tiered based on the level of development that's happening, but using building permits as a way of people buying into the investment of Coos Bay and helping us to improve our parks. The other option would be some kind of taxing district, a parks district. I've been floating that around here and there, as has many of you on the council. Maybe that would be beneficial. There's some ways that could be very advantageous for both Coos Bay and North Bend. We combine and provide services outside of what we're doing now. But of course, that'd be pretty heavy at this point, so I'm not sure how that looks. What is the options? I mean, from the park standpoint, I'd almost need finance department to come in and describe what is happening and what would be available in terms of those options. And I know that this one's going to be unpopular as well, but there was a discussion on using transportation or the transient lodging taxes only for promotion, or maybe opening it up to alternative things. The parks really need some money, and it would be wonderful to spend some dollars here locally to improve our parks and the livability for our own community. These are things that I think of a lot, and there's still more to talk about. The most basic would be starting a Friends of the Parks organization where people could donate and bequest and, get tax deductible donations to the parks, and we could start getting matching funding through that organization. That's, yet another way, but I'm kind of looking for direction from the council as to what would even be on the table. Would it be any of those? You're willing to listen to any of those? Are any of those completely off the table? Have you on the council had any ideas as to ways that we could increase funding towards the parks? I realize that this might be my pet project, so if you're thinking about ways to pull more dollars into the city, it might be going to a different pot. So I don't know, I just wanted to start the conversation off there.
So I totally agree with Carmen. We need alternative funding for the parks to make them viable. There is no way the budget that we have in the city is going to ever be able to accomplish this. And what we're facing in the future, and Nicole can chime in, with PERS, I imagine this biennium will go up another 250,000, which will make it like 1.25 every year now that we're having to do. So an alternative funding we need. And I think that alternative funding needs to be close to $1 million a year for parks. I know that may be a lofty goal, but I think that's what we need to be at to accomplish these goals, which I think are good goals and achievable goals, but it needs to have the funding, and we can get with grants. So with that being said, we need a park and rec district. I would support. I'm not sure what that would bring in and what percentage that would be. I also would support, maybe other funding, but I'm not sure what's available. We did a tough program for roads that generated $1 million a year. Something like that available for the park, would that be supported? I have no idea. But those are things that I think that we need to think about. I'm not sure, what the council is willing, their appetite on this is to do it, but I agree, without alternative funding, we don't have too much of a chance or a very steep goal of trying to accomplish some of this stuff that needs to be done. And, I think Stephanie mentioned, are we going to be at a point, if we don't do something, that we lose Mingus Park altogether? Those are the possibilities that we're looking at. So I'm in favor of alternative funding and sitting down and discussing it, and maybe having our finance department get involved and give us some ideas of what we need to get there and how. So
I was just going to add that, I'm always one of those people where I prefer the buy-in method as opposed to the hammer, which is, or even something that's kind of down the middle road. To me, the Friends of creating a 501c3 foundation of some sort gives people an opportunity to benefit and then help the city benefit, as opposed to saying, we're going to add another fee or another tax. But any kind of a district or a levy would have to go out to the voters, and the voters are going to tell you where they stand on something like that. My question, though, when I look at this list, I know that you alluded to this at the beginning of the discussion, that some things have some funding that has been received, so those are on this list because of that. Has the Parks Commission prioritized this and said, this thing is important, that we get this on, because there's no numbers on here, it's just a list with bullet items.
This is Coco Sutton. We didn't put a number 1 through whatever on items because we know some things, for example, the pond, are going to take a larger budget and there's going to be a long time frame to get into those grants. What I do want to add, and I looked back to see if there was the list in our previous work session held on September 5th, and I didn't see the detailed list, but we did bring fact-finding for types of funding. And we talked about everything from a foundation versus a friends group, food and beverage taxes. My assignments were the food and beverage tax, the issues with getting a district, a special district, which would be a park district. So we do have reports on those items. I didn't know if...
So Coco, I did go back, I did pull that information from the work session.
Okay.
So we did talk, or the commission did talk about tax revenue, grants, volunteer, people just donating money, prepared food and beverage tax that Carmen alluded to, public-private partnerships, the use of more than 1% of the gas tax, the creation of a foundation or a 501c, the creation of a park and recreation district, and then also a developmental fee associated with permits. Those were the topics that were discussed by the commission as looking for possible alternate funding sources. So,
And to answer your question, Stephanie, they're not numbered because we're working on all of this concurrently.
correct.
Yeah, and I would just chip in there too. Yeah, we didn't assign numbers, but if you go down the list, rehabilitation and replacement of Mingus Park restrooms, there's already some money there. The Safe Routes to School is for planning. That grant's already been approved, so we have the money. In fact, on October the 8th, they're going to come down and do an audit of the area to go ahead and get that done. The Front Street bicycle and pedestrian improvements, I think Jennifer can correct me, but she's got it down on there. There's a 30% design already for it. They've already submitted, staff has already submitted a letter of interest, and we've been told by ODOT that we have a good chance of getting approved. And again, it's planning money, requires a little bit more than 10% match, but you know, that's something that's probably doable. The downtown Sharrows project, which we're going to talk about a little bit later, would have to come out of the 1% gas tax stuff. The stabilization of Mingus Park Community Building's got some funding already sent to it. So really it's the dredging of Mingus Park Pond is the big one. And you know, the citywide comprehension bike and pedestrian plan, I really do think there's some money there from ODOT. This last year we had a good chance to apply for it. I think this year we will, and that will be really helpful for us. So, and the Marshfield Pioneer Cemetery doesn't ask for money from us. They just ask us to support them for grants. So, you know, that's part of the money issue of this whole thing that everybody's been talking about. Some of those things have already just been started and are in the works. So that's part of the reason they're there.
Okay.
The reason why we're having the funding conversation is because we have lofty goals and we need matches for that. So that's why this stuff's all happening concurrently, is because we see 4 years down the road, we have this major grant that's going to go into effect and we need matches for it. So how can we get there?
Okay.
I would, if that information was given to us, I apologize, I don't have it. Could I get that list of those funding sources?
Yes.
Thanks.
Yes, sir.
I mean, because I think long-term, I'll again agree with the mayor that long-term funding is always going to be an issue, because even if we do get the projects, the part we were just talking about is having money to maintain them, so we don't, you know, get into this deferred maintenance where we're facing a close or you know, completely redo situation, that we can stay on top of all these projects and keep them nice and usable. Yeah.
Now, one of the examples I want to give you is the Mingus Park Community Building, known as the Scout Cabin. The internet, as you know, when an article gets published about a city or a community or a business, that never dies. There's an article that was published in 2009 by The World that's still on the internet, that still can be looked up, and it describes that community building being used by children, bat and rat feces, leaking this, and this, and this. But every time over the last, I think since 1950, that building has been threatened to be razed or closed, there's a big hullabaloo with everybody saying we want to keep it open. But at some point, we have to work better as City Council, Parks Commissioner, and City to communicate to people that here's an example of the dog chasing its tail. We have a building that's already built. It has a kitchen, it has restrooms. There's no one that can use it unless they get a permit. There's no way that people know that you can get a permit. Most of the people that we've surveyed over the last 2 years didn't even know the city owned it. Staff is concerned about renting it out because is there going to be liability? At some point in the past, and that certainly doesn't involve anyone sitting here today, a decision would have been made to say, are we going to raise it? Or are we going to do something about it? And unfortunately, we find ourselves in that position now. To get this building to code is not an option. That's why getting it on the National Historic Register, which is an arduous process, is important, because then it opens you up to different funding. Trying to get funding from other sources, because you bring up the historic issue and the WPA and the fact that architecturally there's nothing else like it, because it's a D-log vertical cabin and everything's from the area. But the fact that you don't have a place where people can rent how much of it do you want to fix up? So we're trying to get on that, but it's, when we talk about prioritizing, pulling the community in, whether they tell you yes or no, is very important. And how do you do that? People on the east side have their comments about once they became part of the city. Windy Hill, you know, what are you going to do with that? Until you do some kind of engagement, which doesn't really cost any money, it has open house and feedback. And then the ultimate test is, what do the taxpayers that fund it have to say? And I don't think, personally, we've done a good job of including that mechanism. Do you want to pay $200,000 or $300,000 to fix this building that's been a resource in your community, used by a myriad of people for almost 100 years, or do you just want to tear it down? Or do you want to wait till it falls down on somebody and hurts them, and then you're going to spend more money than you ever thought to maintenance it? So those are concerns that deal with all of these things, whether it's trails or otherwise. And there's also the option of, do you have too many resources in the Parks Department to manage? Just because somebody gave you something, do you have to accept it? And those are concerns too.
And the reality is, it's much easier to maintain what we have than try to develop something new. You know, if you lose it and then try to develop it later, it's going to cost a lot more. Like you said, when you described how we acquired the properties, and I think even the state is looking at, you know, instead of tearing down and building up from the ground up. We just had this conversation in another meeting that I was in, that sometimes it's better to rehab what you have as long as it's not too far gone. So, I mean, maybe they're talking about buildings in that instance, but at the same time, if you tried to develop a park from, you know, just a piece of property that you had, it would be very expensive. Any other comments on the funding?
Just to kind of reiterate here, the feedback was asked on the goals. I think we have some good feedback there as far as council kind of supporting that. And then it does sound like there is interest to bring back all of these funding options with a little bit more detail, and it seems there's already some of that work done. So it's just bringing in that financial piece. Maybe that might help round it out. It hasn't been elevated to council yet because there hasn't been a recommendation by the Parks Commission, as they're still kind of vetting some things. But It does sound like all options might be on the table.
And we're continuing to do more research, and we have our next work section touches on a few items that we brought up as well before we make a recommendation. And then a lot of this goes back to our major staffing cut that happened in the late 80s during that recession. And that's when we lost our park staff, and we've never gotten it back. So I think we should applaud ourselves that we've made it this long. We've made it 40 years. But that's why things are so expensive, is because we've been just getting there as best we can.
And Ariane, my apologies for not introducing you when you came in. You are the chair of the Parks Commission and have been on that commission for a number of years. So, yeah.
So, Nicole, can you address the staffing on parks? I know this has come up multiple times.
In regards to, right now we have one full-time staff member. However, we do supplement that position with temp help through agencies. The parks operating budget is within the general fund, along with police and fire, engineering, finance, all the admin folks. So it's sharing the bucket of money from also very crucial services to the city. It is where we are.
So how much park staff have we lost over the years? Ariane referenced it. I just like, have we lost 4 or 5 positions, or what's the status?
When I looked back, because this was a question that was recently posed, I did kind of look back through the data that we have in our finance, our accounting software. And over the years, based on how people were classified, we haven't necessarily reduced the parks classified people. They still exist today. They've been focused on like, for example, we took one person maybe in, they are now building maintenance focused. We did have a period about in 2009 where we had 5 months or so where we added 5 people. My guess is there was a funding source or a very specific project that we were able to do that for that they started and ended in the same time period. So I can't speak to that. I wasn't here at that time period, but the graph shows we've not really had much change in the last 10 to 15 years in our staffing as far as parks goes.
We've been limping along since the 80s.
I know when I was researching some things in the 1980s, there was people and prior, so I went back to 1930, and there were people that were volunteer coordinators. Almost everything you have in your parks was a donation, a gift. The city had no skin in building it. They did have to maintain it. They did have a lot of volunteers, and you had a lot of civic organizations and clubs that contributed to that, as well as scouting organizations, because that was the thing that was happening at that time, the community engagement. You also had a lot of industrial organizations, lumber, timber, et cetera. So for example, the building of that cabin up there is a community building that was 660 board feet that was donated by a local timber company and the county. You had stone from the county and Engren's Coos River. They had a quarry up there. It's still there. So looking back, the thing that was a linchpin that we noticed starting in 1980 was the volunteer coordinator, because getting someone to manage volunteers, although that's changed, you still have the liability of feeding and caring for them if they get hurt, if they're working outside of their scope of work. You have the subject worker issues. Most park and recreation, whether it's federal, state, local, depend on an enormous amount of volunteers to get things done. Your local example is Shore Acres. Having something like a foundation or a 501c3 friends group, but also someone that coordinates and manages volunteers is crucial. And you lost that position somewhere along the lines. They didn't probably just work for parks. There's other places where they worked. But that seems to be something that started going away when a lot of this decline started happening.
And there's a formula, and we've done it, but it's been too far back in my brain. There's a calculation that is recommended by the parks industry specialists on how many FTE we should have to maintain, and we can get that number when we do our presentation on alternate funding sources. Because we did it a number of years ago, and it was like, I think 11. Or something like that.
Yeah, the parks recreation organizations look at how much land you have, and there's an FTE issue, and then what kind of structures or assets. One of the things that was not happening, which bears mentioning, is when you look at funding, you have a lot of buildings that you're caring for that are historic in nature. They require a lot of funding and caring. You own the buildings, and somebody else is using those buildings. So that adds to a lot of the cost of maintaining resources, and you're not getting tax liability or tax revenue off of them because, anyway, there's a lot of those things that happened starting the 70s and 80s, urban renewal, things like that, where money that you had was redirected or redistributed. And those positions, you can see where things changed, because you can't be all things to all people. But I would also say that the cautionary tale is, if you build it, you either keep it up to par or you make a decision. And we've had to do that in this state of taking something and taking it offline and saying we just can't offer it anymore. State parks and local parks have closed, and they've raised them because of a myriad of issues, but it comes down to liability because you can't maintain them. So that's something to consider when you start adding up the acreage and the square footage and the maintenance of buildings. So you have the maintenance of the water resources with all the DEQ and all the maintenance and requirements. You have the issue with the land and who's on it. Are they dumping on it? Are they doing things? How much are you spending on that? Issues with environmental impact from that. And then when you start building assets on it. So it becomes this big pile that's easy to ignore until you can't ignore it anymore. And there's hard decisions sometimes that have to be made.
And I would imagine you would get a lot of community engagement the minute that you tried to raise a park. But I was going to also add that this is not just what is happening within the city. When I married my husband, there were, I think, 12 park rangers out at state parks, and they've had, everyone has experienced this, local, state, and federal.
Can I make one quick comment about staffing? One of the things I've noticed from being on the commission is I so appreciate the city staff that we have right now. They do a wonderful job, but the one thing that I found out, they're pulled in so many directions. You know, they are short-staffed. And so some of the things that the Parks Commission might like to do, it can't get to just because staff really is so busy. You know, we may have these goals up here, which are great, and then Greg over there may have a boat ramp over on east side that gets damaged, and he's got to turn all his attention to that. So, and we share the city engineer who has lots of projects other than Parks Commission projects. So I love them. They work really hard, but boy, they're really pulled apart, so.
Well, I appreciate the thoughtfulness that the commission has done with regards to the time and the funding and the time that staff has to spend and the other myriad of things that they do for the city, but also the complications that arise when it comes to funding that and the thoughtfulness to maintaining what we have after we get it fixed up. Is there any other comments? Then we'll go ahead and move to the next agenda item, which is discussion on the bike facilities improvement project design from Front Street to Mingus Park. And I'm not sure, is that you, Greg?
Yeah,
Are you
absolutely.
taking that as well?
I'll do that one as well.
All right.
So, the summer of 2022, a bike route from Front Street to Mingus that it initially consisted of Sharrow's markings was presented to council. At the October 25th, 2022 City Council work session, staff presented information identifying what Sharrows were, design considerations for Sharrows, overview of what the bicycle section from the 2020 to 2040 Coos Bay Transportation System Plan and the Sharrow proposal. At that same meeting, council requested staff work with traffic engineer to develop a plan for implementation of the proposed bike route and investigate a return route. The city formed a bicycle committee comprised of several members of the community who are avid bikers. Staff contacted with Kim Parducci of Southern Oregon Transportation Engineer and conducted 2 meetings with the bike committee and Kim Parducci. In May of 2023, the Southern Oregon Transportation Engineering delivered the draft analysis, which is a little bit further down in the staff report, to staff and the committee for review and comment. Staff presented a final version of this study dated May 30th, 2023 to council at the July 25th, 2023 work session outlining the results of this collaboration. Based on council comments, additional information was requested. These comments led to a memorandum dated October 23 of 2023 that is also attached. At the November 7th, 2023 council meeting, the Parks Commission was tasked with reviewing and making recommendations for bicycle and pedestrian accessibility within the city. Additionally, on December 5th, 2023, City Council amended the Coos Bay Municipal Code, Chapter 2.30, which added a commission member that is a bicycle or pedestrian enthusiast with subject matter expertise. The additional member makes the Parks Commission a 9-member body. The Parks Commission has discussed the proposal of the bike facilities improvement project from Front Street to Mingus Park over the course of multiple meetings. Most recently, at the June 20th, 2024 Parks Commission meeting, the commission requested staff advance the project to the final design phase. At the July 18th, 2024 Parks Commission meeting, staff presented the costs for a final design phase. The commission selected a preferred alternative route, alternative number 1, and recommended approval of the final design costs. The preferred alternative route will start at Front Street and Market, crossing both north and southbound Highway 101 lanes. Once past these intersections, the route will consist of Sharrows along Market Avenue to North 4th Street. then south to Commercial Avenue intersection. Cyclists will then travel west along Commercial Avenue via a dedicated two-way buffered bike lane on North 7th Street, where the bike lane will transition back to a Sharrows along Commercial Avenue to North 10th Street to the Mingus Park entrance. The return route will be reverse of the described route above. There are some design challenges that will need to be investigated further during the final design. One of the design challenges will be the north and southbound Highway 101 crossings. Additionally, this route will remove on-street parking on the north side of Commercial Avenue between North and 4th and North 7th Street. And lastly, a modification of the traffic signal at the intersection of 4th Street and Commercial Avenue will be necessary, which will result in a new bike signal phase and possibly a new pole to facilitate the new added bike lanes. So there is the topic and some background.
I have some questions, Stephanie.
Yes, go ahead. I had a couple too, but go ahead.
So Greg, so is ODOT going to put a crossing in across 101 for the bike path?
I'm sorry, could you ask that again, please?
Is ODOT going to put the bike crossing on 101 for the crossing for the bikes on 101?
So I think we've reached out to ODOT, and I believe that they've got a recommendation out, but I don't think that they're proposing putting in a crossing there. I don't think ODOT is proposing that. I think they're going to require the city put that in, so that there will be an additional cost for that.
Do we have an idea what the cost would be?
Right around $230,000.
Okay, and also the signal that is necessary for this bike path on 4th, what kind of cost are we looking at that upgrade to that bike?
I don't have a design, I don't have a construction cost for that, but it is included in the design cost of the $38,000 for design. I don't know what the construction cost is at this point.
Do you have any idea what it would be? Are we talking 100,000, 150,000, more?
And my question was also on that. Is that going to require a different design of that traffic signal?
It would, the design, there would be a new pole added to that intersection of 4th and Commercial. So I don't know if it would require a new pole or a modification of the existing pole. I know that it would require a new pole. And so I'm not sure what the cost of that would be. I don't want to guess.
I thought when we were looking at that section that we just redid on 4th Street up to the light, going past that intersection would have included that light, and that was a significant cost. Because if I recall, and maybe my fellow counselors can help me remember, that light pole may not be up to today's standards or what?
At the intersection of 4th and Commercial?
Yeah.
All of the traffic signals were updated.
They were at the time.
With that project, yes.
Okay.
And then also, one other cost that we don't have is, so I have an estimate of construction from ODOT. I don't have an estimate of design costs from ODOT. So there would also be more additional costs associated with design.
Okay, so since that signal was updated, it would probably be easier to accommodate whatever is proposed in this.
So my understanding is that the bike phase would be a separate pole at that intersection of 4th and Commercial. The design cost associated with the crossing of 101, there's going to be a design cost associated with that, and I don't know what that design cost would be at this point.
Are there any other questions or comments?
I was just going to say the crossing of Highway 101 going south, of course, on Market isn't an issue. It said in the presentation that that's something to look at, but there's a lighted intersection there. So that's not the issue. The issue is crossing over to Market Street across Highway 101 going north. And I think that's the one that the mayor brought up as well. The regular Front Street project, the big one that's up there, you know, that we're gonna go in for some design fees, the original 30% plan had a crosswalk there. In fact, it had a pedestrian crosswalk on 2 other streets past that as well. I think, you know, I think you've got it, I think getting across that street is difficult right now. There's only one lighted
for
intersection
cars, too.
close down on Anderson, and so it's really tough to get across there. At the same token, however, that whole Front Street area and the Coos Bay Village, or whatever we call it down there, is really an area that's being developed. And not only do we have to improve bicycle traffic to get there, we have to improve pedestrian traffic. And that also makes the boardwalk more accessible, right? So at some point in time, we've got to bite the bullet on how to get people across Highway 101 down by Market Street. It certainly ought to be included in the big plan for Front Street. You know, I think it might be possible to get by with the blinking yellow light rather than an intersection, but a road engineer, someone who knows that, us to make that kind of decision. But, you know, when we talk about looking for the future, you know, that's been great development down there, and it needs better access. I mean, that's all there is to it. So I know it's a concern, but I think even if there wasn't a bike path going in there, we would want to look at some way to improve access to Market Street from Front Street. So.
I think for all modes of transportation, pedestrian, bicycle, and vehicle. So.
I can tell you that we have tried, Kurt and the rest of the council and staff, and chime in, to get a light there. I have asked ODOT for years that this needs to be done, and because it's dangerous. They will not and have not agreed to allow us even to put one in. Even if we had the funding, they wouldn't allow us to put one in there. So ODOT's got to step up to the plate and say they're willing to let us put one in there before we can even move forward on it. So I'm not sure how to get past that hurdle. I mean, Greg or somebody else, Jennifer, you want to chime in on this? I mean, unless there's something new that I'm not aware of, they won't even let us consider putting a light in there.
It seems that there's much more there's a lot more accessing that area through that intersection
Did the
today than there was even 5 years ago.
Mandatory TSP for the development, did it go that far down? I know the main focus at the time was the intersection near Red Lion, but did the TSP do number traffic counts down there?
For the,
Yes.
for the Coos Bay Village?
Yeah,
I,
because that's an accessory route to it.
I don't
I
know,
understand. Yeah.
I don't know if that.
I don't know. I mean, unless somebody knows something that I don't know with ODOT, I mean, they have not been willing to reconsider this all the way along. I mean, when Coos Bay Village was being developed in Front Street, we did a Front Street blueprint plan. We asked ODOT, who was on that committee with us, to consider that light, and they ignored us on it. And that Front Street blueprint plan was done how many years ago? 3 years ago? Something like that. And Coos Bay Village was in the full swing of being developed.
I was just going to say, you know, I've talked to Eric a little bit, and he's had contact with some of the ODOT people, and maybe there's a little bit more willingness to do something down there. I don't know, but I'm not sure. I mean, you may know, Joe. I'm not sure why ODOT wouldn't be interested in putting a light in there, considering everything that's going on with that area and the plan that we're putting into ODOT to even improve Front Street from its current condition, that would just increase traffic even more. And I always make this point, and people always, you know, scrunch up their faces when I do it. But if you're going south on Highway 101 through Coos Bay, starting at Market Street, there is a light every corner, all the way down past where Tower Ford is, down to McDonald's. There's a light on every one of those corners. And so when people tell me, well, gee, we don't want another light in there to disrupt traffic, my response to them is traffic runs really well through downtown Coos Bay. And by the way, since the lights are timed, they all do it at the speed limit rather than about 5 or 10 miles over that they do when they're going on Highway 101 north. And so I don't know what ODOT's objections are. To me, it makes perfect sense to control traffic on Highway 101 going north and maybe reduce some of the speeding. And it also allows access to the new Front Street developments and the boardwalk. So I just think it's something that ought to be done. That's my 2 cents worth.
I don't disagree, and I guess to get off this subject and move forward, I would say that we ask staff to ask ODOT to allow us to put a light in and see what they say. And without that approval, then I don't know where we go at this point in time, because I think it would be an impediment without the light there.
Greg, maybe it's time for us to do a sit down. We've done that with other projects with ODOT. And maybe it's time for us to sit down, a couple council, Joe, some people from Parks, people representing the bike community, and just have a sit down with ODOT informally. That's been successful in the past.
And ODOT's just finished all of those community outreach. They've had several of them around the state, including here.
They were here, yeah.
They've been here 2 or 3 times this year. So they obviously have some federal money and have been directed to pay more attention to the multimodal and not just the regular gasoline.
I just think that things have changed so much dramatically over the last few years, just a handful of years, that they almost need to look at that. And I'm one of those people that doesn't like to stop every block, but, I made it through town great just the other day when I was trying to get to a meeting on the south end of town. The only time there's really an issue is when there's, a big festival downtown, traffic moves through there. One more is not going to make a difference, and I think it would actually help encourage people to access those businesses. It's not industrial and warehouses like it used to be. It is retail, restaurants, and other things. I think it's a good idea.
Just as a side note, when we speak to whether or not ODOT has capacity to support this beyond their approval, the chamber has a transportation committee, and I just attended that last one, and ODOT spoke at that, and they are looking at significant budget cuts, which is going to include staffing changes. So we can maybe get to the approval point, but just looking to them for funding might be a challenge.
In part of the reason why they don't, they hate the multiple lights because they come in and they have to reset the timers, and it's incredibly labor intensive. So that's part of the reason why they shy away from additional light structures, is because of the timing and the labor intensity in that, which is unfortunate. But I think in this case, it would be beneficial for everyone, in pedestrians, bicycles, vehicles, and then also the safety, because that is where people floor it and start really speeding through our area.
I think it's definitely worth revisiting. I think we should move forward on setting up some sort of meeting with them. I have another, it's tangential at best question, but remind me why we didn't just go from Front Street straight up commercial? Because 1st through 4th was too narrow or something?
Well, I would chime in that we did hear at the council meeting from businesses on that first particular block on the southbound. And also accessing off of Highway 101, you need that additional space. I think that the committee was actually trying to have the least amount of impact on business, and they really were thoughtful in that direction in going market as opposed to going commercial. Obviously, it would be, a straight line would be much better, but there were some very vocal folks that came out to the meeting that were concerned about losing that on-street parking right off of Highway 101, because they did not have off-street parking. Sure.
So background, Eric was heavily involved in the process from the very beginning. So.
Hi, so Eric Clough again here. In the question about the design of the route, as a cyclist, the safest route is going to be the slower volume, slower speed streets. Commercial is a busy street and it's a higher speed. The Market Street is a comfortable ride for almost anybody. You, your family, your kids would even be okay riding as a Sharrows taking a lane on Market Street. You're not going to be too comfortable on Commercial. So that was the purpose of routing up Market Street.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I was going to say, when the traffic engineer did the study, they rated Market Street as type 3, which means it could be used for Sharrows, as opposed to type 2, which requires a bike lane. So it just was a safer way to go for cyclists. Plus, I agree, it has less impact on some of the businesses and some other things as well.
Yeah, and it makes, I didn't mean to hijack the conversation. I want to keep us moving forward, especially for time restraints, but I was just curious, because I'm looking at it and it seemed like there was a straight line there. The answers made sense. Thank you. I'm good.
Carmen?
Yeah, I just really wanted to hammer on the fact that it is a very big component that it's going to reduce the loss of parking. But there's also one more part, and I realize, Troy, that you're all good with this, but Market Street is the entrance into Bayshore on the other side of northbound 101, whereas Commercial dead ends into the railway. So you would have to get on 101 and then travel down one more block to get over into Bayshore or Front Street, I guess is what I should be saying. So it really does make a lot of sense the way that it's been proposed, and I'm really grateful for the amount of work that has been done on this. Also, the two-way bike lane portion between 4th and 7th has tripped me up for a while, but it was also mentioned earlier today that one of the property owners sees people going both directions all the time on bikes, which is not necessarily safe at this moment. That's not recommended. But if it was a buffered lane, like is proposed, it really is a nice route to get back and forth that way, and it would be advantageous. So opening your mind to a two-way bike lane on a one-way road is something that took a little bit for me. So if anybody's having a hard time with that, I completely understand.
Okay. Anything else from the commission or the council? All right, next steps.
I mean, we don't have necessarily any question on whether or not there's maybe interest. So the next step is, getting approval of moving that design phase along. And I think we have costs associated with moving that forward. So that would come to council.
Okay. All right, and some of the requests that council had made to maybe get some additional information on the traffic signal, and then the sit down. Okay.
Again, butting in, I think where we're at is the proposal was spending some money for a final design for this two-way bike route. And undoubtedly in doing that, that would answer some questions about cost. And then I think once that design study comes back and here's how what it's actually going to look like, and here's how much it's going to cost you to put in this bike path, then, the council can take a look at that and make a decision on how they want to go forward. So I'm thinking the next step, at least from my view on the Parks Commission, is go ahead and approve going out for the real design rather than just the study, and get some cost estimates on what it's going to cost to do it.
Okay. All right. I think we have reached the end of our agenda for the evening. And at this point, I think I will adjourn the meeting. Sorry. It's like I've never run a meeting before.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you everyone for attending. And again, thank you for the Parks Commission for taking the time to come tonight and help us. with the information.
We'd like to make